I still hear her scream in my dreams. That high-pitched, broken sound, half terror, half pain, echoes through my mind every time I close my eyes. It was supposed to be a regular afternoon. My daughter was home early from therapy, curled up on the couch with her favorite stuffed giraffe, humming along to a cartoon. The sun filtered through the curtains. It was peaceful, normal. But normal ended the moment Karen stepped onto our porch. I didn't see it at first, just heard the crash, a dull thud from somewhere below, then silence. My heart dropped. I called out for her, but no answer came. Only when I ran toward the basement door did I hear it. That awful scream. It clawed its way through the locked wooden door like nails on a chalkboard. "Mom, I can't move," she cried, her voice small, desperate. I fumbled with the doorknob. Locked. How the hell was it locked? I pounded on the door, screaming her name, searching for the keys, my hands trembling so badly they wouldn't work. I could hear her sobbing, saying it hurt, that it was dark. I grabbed a flashlight and tried to shine it through the cracks, but it barely lit anything, just a smear of red on the stairs and her stuffed giraffe lying crooked near the bottom. That's when I knew something was terribly, terribly wrong. When I finally got the door open, the sight nearly broke me. My little girl, my brave, beautiful daughter, was lying at the bottom of the stairs, twisted in a way no child should ever be. Her leg was at an angle that made me sick, her arms bruised, her face streaked with tears. "She pushed me," she whispered, barely conscious. "Karen pushed me, then closed the door." At first, I didn't want to believe it. I told myself maybe she fell, maybe she was confused. But the security camera, what was left of it, told a different story. Footage gone. Cables sliced. And Karen? She denied everything. Said we were making it up. Said we were trying to extort the HOA. Then came the letters, the fines, the warnings, the threats. They wanted me silent. But they picked the wrong mother. I trusted my neighbors. I trusted the HOA. I trusted Karen. Until that day, we weren't looking for anything extravagant, just peace. After years of bouncing between hospitals, temporary rentals, and neighborhoods that didn't quite feel like home, I made a decision. We were going to start over, just the two of us. My daughter, Sophie, and I. She was 8 at the time, small for her age, with a shy smile and eyes that had already seen too much of the world. Sophie was born with a mild form of cerebral palsy, which affected the strength in her right leg and sometimes her coordination. She walked with a slight limp, wore a leg brace, and had more courage in her little frame than most adults I know. After my divorce, we had lived in survival mode, me working 2 jobs, her attending physical therapy sessions between school and bedtime. It was exhausting, but we held onto each other like driftwood in a storm. So, when I got promoted at work and qualified for a down payment on a house, it felt like the universe was finally throwing us a rope. The neighborhood was quiet, nestled in the hills just outside the city. Tree-lined streets, kids riding bikes, fresh-cut lawns, and mailboxes adorned with seasonal flags. It was the kind of place where life moved at a gentle pace. A perfect community for families. The realtor had promised, gesturing toward the park down the street where toddlers chase bubbles in the sun. And it was. At first, our house had a big front porch, a cozy kitchen where Sophie and I baked cookies on weekends, and a basement I imagined turning into a therapy room or art studio. We unpacked quickly, eager to make it feel like ours. Neighbors dropped by with welcome casseroles and smiles. One even helped install the accessibility ramp we built near the back steps for Sophie's walker. I remember thinking, this is it. We're finally safe. Finally home. Among those who welcomed us was Karen. She lived 2 doors down in a house with hydrangeas perfectly spaced along the walkway and a white trellis over her front door. She was immaculate, always dressed in crisp khakis or pastel blouses, her blonde bob never out of place, her teeth shockingly white. She brought over a tray of lemon squares the second day we moved in and introduced herself with an air of warm authority. "I'm the HOA secretary," she said with a confident smile. "We like to keep things tidy around here, but we're a very inclusive community." At the time, I took her words at face value. She seemed involved, even helpful. She warned me about trash pickup days, gave me the HOA handbook, and once offered to walk Sophie to the bus stop when I was late getting home. I remember thinking how kind that was. Looking back, I wonder if it was always just surveillance masked as neighborliness. Sophie, despite her condition, thrived in the new environment. She made a friend down the block named Lily, who didn't seem to notice her brace at all. They'd sit on the porch after school, coloring or swapping stickers, their laughter filling the neighborhood air like music. Sophie was finally smiling more, asking fewer questions about why Daddy wasn't around or why some kid stared at her in public. We had a routine, a rhythm, a fragile piece that I guarded with everything I had. Every Friday, we'd bake together, banana bread, mostly because it was Sophie's favorite. Saturday mornings were therapy appointments, followed by lunch in town. Sundays were for cleaning, music, and long walks, Sophie on her trike, me trailing behind with coffee in hand. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. But Karen, she began to show up too often. At first, it was little things, dropping off printouts of new HOA rules or gently suggesting that I trim my hedge a little shorter so it matched the others on the block. Once, she stopped me while I was bringing groceries in and asked, "Is Sophie doing okay walking around alone? I saw her stumble the other day. Maybe you should keep her inside more." It was framed like concern, but her tone didn't sit right. Still, I thanked her and moved on, brushing it off. I didn't want to assume the worst. Not yet. Over time, I began to notice patterns. If Sophie left a toy in the yard, I'd find a polite HOA notice taped to the mailbox the next day. When I installed a small wind chime on the porch, Sophie loved the sound. Karen informed me it violated noise decorum. "It's barely audible," I told her. She smiled. "It's not about volume. It's about visual clutter." She once scolded Sophie directly for walking too slowly on the shared sidewalk when other kids wanted to pass. I overheard it from the window. "You're blocking the path, sweetheart. Try to move along." I wanted to run out and scream at her, but I didn't. I still wanted to believe she was just blunt, not cruel, that maybe I was being too sensitive. But as weeks turned into months, it became clear Karen didn't like us. Or rather, she didn't like Sophie. It was in the way she always had something to report. Your trash bin was half an inch from the curb line, or that garden gnome might violate aesthetic cohesion. It was constant, passive-aggressive, exhausting. And the other neighbors? They smiled, but rarely got involved. "That's just Karen," one of them told me with a shrug. "She's always been a little intense. She means well." But I started to sense something deeper beneath her pristine exterior, something controlling, something territorial, and something about us set her off. Sophie remained blissfully unaware, at least at first. But children are perceptive. She'd sometimes ask why Karen didn't smile at her anymore, or why she wasn't allowed to ride her scooter past Karen's driveway. Once, she came inside crying because Karen told her she wasn't allowed to drag her leg in front of guests during the neighborhood potluck. "It scares people," she had whispered. I saw red that day. I wanted to confront her, but I didn't want to escalate things, not in a place we had just started calling home. Still, I started documenting everything. I kept screenshots of the HOA emails, photos of notices, recordings of our brief confrontations. Not because I thought I'd need them, but because something didn't feel right. There was a tension building, a quiet war I hadn't fully admitted we were a part of, but I didn't expect what would happen next. I didn't expect it to escalate. So far, I didn't expect it to get dangerous. And I sure as hell didn't expect that one day I'd find my daughter at the bottom of our own basement stairs, sobbing, broken, and whispering the one name that made my blood run cold, Karen. It started with a letter, an official-looking envelope tucked into our mailbox, stamped with the familiar HOA seal and signed, as always, by Karen. The tone was formal, but the message was clear. The small accessibility ramp we had built behind the house for Sophie was deemed non-compliant with neighborhood aesthetic guidelines. I stared at the words, stunned. The ramp wasn't large. It didn't obstruct anyone's view. It was tucked neatly behind a line of shrubs and painted to match the house. But apparently, it was now considered an eyesore. "Please have it removed or redesigned to meet community standards," the letter read. I remember Sophie, looking up at me from the kitchen table, playing with her toy giraffe. I smiled weakly and folded the letter. I didn't tell her. Not yet. I filed an appeal with the HOA, backed by a doctor's note and ADA recommendations, hoping reason would prevail. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about aesthetics. It was about control. And it was about Sophie. A week later, more letters came, this time listing violations I didn't even understand. Our porch light was too bright, and our garbage bins were visible for longer than HOA regulations permit. Someone claimed our holiday wreath exceeded the 24-inch diameter rule. It felt ridiculous, petty, like a game Karen was playing. But it didn't feel like a game to me. This was our home, and suddenly it was being turned against us. I began noticing shadows near our property late at night, quick movements along the fence, a flicker by the side gate, the sound of someone fiddling with something outside my daughter's window. I grew paranoid, installed a camera on the porch and one over the ramp. But then, mysteriously, the footage began disappearing. The camera would record one night, but the file would be corrupted the next. Once, I checked the memory card, only to find it completely wiped. I replaced the system, but it happened again. The footage was gone, erased, no sign of a break-in, just silence and missing hours. Sophie, meanwhile, was beginning to change. My bright, bubbly girl was growing quieter, more reserved. She didn't want to play outside anymore. She'd asked to be picked up early from school, saying she had a stomachache or that she didn't feel right. One afternoon, she came home in tears, her eyes red, her giraffe clutched tightly in her arms. I knelt down, alarmed, and asked what happened. Karen told me I was a burden, she whispered. She said, I scare people, and that you're selfish for keeping me out where everyone can see me. My hands trembled. I felt a rage I'd never known before surge through me, but I held Sophie close instead. I couldn't let her see how broken I was in that moment. I told her Karen was wrong, that she was beautiful and kind and brave, but I could see the damage already taking root in her eyes, the way she looked away, the way she didn't believe me. I tried confronting Karen calmly at first. I walked to her door with the intention of talking it out, woman to woman, mother to neighbor. She opened it before I even knocked, as if she had been watching through the blinds. Oh, she said, with that sickly sweet smile. Is there a problem? I told her that Sophie had come home crying, that her words had hurt my daughter. Her smile didn't waver. Children misunderstand things all the time, she replied. I was just being honest. Maybe if you weren't so emotional, you'd realize I'm actually trying to help. This neighborhood wasn't designed for special accommodations. She emphasized those words like they were filth. I wanted to scream, to shove her, to do something, anything, but I didn't. I walked away. I filed another complaint. It was dismissed within hours. After that, things escalated fast. The warnings from the HOA turned into fines. Our mailbox was vandalized twice. The tires on Sophie's wheelchair-accessible trike were slashed in the driveway. I reported it all, but there were never witnesses, never any evidence, just more silence, more shrugs, more looks from the neighbors that said, "You're making too much noise." I tried installing new locks, security lights, even motion detectors. Nothing helped. The tension was growing unbearable. Then came the day that would change everything. It was a Thursday. I had just come home from work, exhausted, arms full of groceries. Sophie had gotten home earlier than me and was supposed to be inside, watching TV or playing quietly. But the house was unusually silent. No cartoons, no humming, no little feet padding across the floor. Just quiet. I called her name once, twice, then again, louder. Panic prickled the back of my neck. I dropped the grocery bags and began searching. Living room, empty. Kitchen, empty. Upstairs, nothing. Then I noticed the basement door slightly ajar, just an inch. I walked over and called her name again. Nothing. I opened the door. That's when I heard it. A scream. High-pitched. Raw. My daughter's voice, shaking, broken, muffled behind the thick wood and echoing from below. Mom. Help. I can't get up, she cried. My heart seized. I ran to the door and yanked it open, only to find it locked. Locked from the outside. That door had never had a lock before. I didn't understand. My hands scrambled for keys, for tools, anything. I could hear her crying, saying it hurt, that she'd fallen, that she was cold. I pressed my face to the door and told her to hang on. Told her I was coming. I don't know how long it took me to break the lock, maybe seconds, maybe years, but when the door finally gave way and I rushed down those stairs, I found her. My baby, lying twisted and crying at the bottom step, her leg bent at an impossible angle, her arm scraped, her lip bloodied, and in her tiny hand, clutched like it was the only thing left in the world, was that damn stuffed giraffe. Through sobs, she told me what happened. Karen was here, she whispered. She was mad. She said I shouldn't be playing near her yard. She opened the door and pushed me, then shut it, locked it. My blood ran cold. My knees buckled, and I knew in that instant that everything had changed, that this wasn't just harassment or passive aggression. This was assault. This was evil. This was war. What followed after the basement incident didn't feel real. It felt like we had crossed a line into some twisted, alternate version of our quiet suburban life, where the rules no longer applied, and the only thing that seemed to grow faster than the fear in my daughter's eyes was the power Karen somehow wielded behind the scenes. I reported everything to the police that same day, armed with medical records, photographs of Sophie's injuries, and her broken words about what Karen had done. I thought the truth would be enough, that any reasonable authority figure would see this for what it was, a brutal act committed against a disabled child, but the officer who showed up looked more inconvenienced than concerned. He took our statement, glanced at the basement door, and scribbled into a thin notepad like he already knew how this would end. "Is there any footage?" he asked, and when I said the cameras had been tampered with before, wires cut, recordings gone, his eyes shifted, judgment replacing curiosity. "Is it possible your daughter fell?" he asked flatly. Sometimes children with conditions can be unsteady. That word, conditions, burned. I snapped back, told him she had been pushed, told him to listen to her, but it was no use. They said they'd file a report and follow up. Days passed, then weeks. No charges, no updates, just more silence. And Karen? She walked past our porch the very next morning like nothing had happened, holding her dog's leash with one hand and a steaming mug in the other, her eyes hidden behind designer sunglasses and her lips curled in a smile that said, "You can't touch me." Sophie changed almost overnight. The vibrant little girl who once danced in the kitchen while we made banana bread now flinched every time the doorbell rang. She stopped sleeping alone and begged to keep the lights on. She didn't want to go outside anymore, not even to see Lily, who kept asking why Sophie wouldn't come out and play. The trauma had wrapped itself around her like a fog. I took her to therapy, but every time the word Karen came up, she would go quiet, withdraw. She was terrified, and in that silence, Karen grew bolder. Anonymous HOA notices began showing up more frequently, typed letters with no signatures, no return addresses, slipped under our door or taped to our fence. "Your landscaping is below community standards. Excessive noise levels reported. Unauthorized child equipment on property, wheelchair ramp." At first, I laughed them off. But then I noticed the citations came with fines, hundreds of dollars in penalties that showed up in our mailbox like clockwork, each one more ridiculous than the last. And then came the warning, 3 more violations and we'd be referred for community arbitration, which, according to the HOA bylaws, could result in forced relocation or foreclosure procedures. I read the words 3 times before I understood their meaning. They were trying to force us out. I started documenting everything. I created a folder on my desktop labeled HOA Hell and filled it with photos, scanned letters, timestamps, and voice recordings of every eerie encounter and notice. But every time I tried to involve someone, a lawyer, a neighbor, even the local news, I hit a wall. No one wanted to get involved. You have to understand. One neighbor told me in hushed tones, "Karen's connected." That's when I started digging. And what I found floored me. Karen wasn't just a secretary in the HOA, she was the sister-in-law of the HOA president. Her brother had started the neighborhood developer group that built this entire subdivision. She wasn't just some power-hungry neighbor. She was part of the machine. And suddenly, everything made sense. The immunity, the way my reports vanished, the way the board meetings mysteriously moved to private sessions every time I asked to attend. Karen had woven herself into the very structure meant to protect us. Still, I fought back. I submitted formal complaints to the city. I contacted disability rights groups. I pushed for a civil case. And then, just when I thought the worst had already happened, Sophie disappeared. It was a stormy Thursday evening. I had run out to the store for 15 minutes to grab groceries. Sophie was upstairs drawing, or so I thought. When I returned, the door was ajar. The lights were flickering. I called out, but no answer. I ran from room to room, heart pounding, yelling her name. Nothing. Until I heard the faintest whimper from the basement again. I ran, praying it wasn't real, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but when I reached the door, it was shut tight, locked again from the outside. I broke it open with my shoulder and rushed down into the darkness. There she was, curled up in the corner, bruised, her face streaked with tears and dirt. She came back, Sophie whispered. She said I ruined her view. She said I don't belong here. My knees hit the floor. I cradled her, sobbing. This time, there was no mistaking the intent. This wasn't some accident. This was deliberate. I was done being afraid. I installed a hidden camera inside the basement light fixture, something Karen wouldn't find. Then I set a trap. I left the house for an hour the following weekend, pretending to run errands. When I returned, nothing seemed out of place until I checked the footage. What I saw made me sick. Karen had entered through the back gate using a duplicate key, stepped into the kitchen, then walked straight to the basement, paused, and slowly tested the lock. She never noticed the camera. She stood there for minutes, adjusting something near the doorframe, probably relocking the hidden latch she had added. Then she walked out calmly, wiping her hands. I had her. I finally had proof. I turned everything over to the police. This time, they couldn't look away. The footage was undeniable. Karen was called in for questioning and claimed she had simply noticed the door was loose and wanted to help secure it for safety reasons. When asked why she used a key that didn't belong to her, she shrugged. I was given access as part of my HOA duties, she lied. But now things were moving. A detective, someone who hadn't been involved in the earlier cases, took a special interest in our situation. He believed us. He pushed, and slowly, the walls began to crack. But Karen didn't go quietly. She started a campaign, door-to-door smear tactics, whispering lies to the neighbors. She's unstable, she said about me. She's endangering her child for sympathy. I overheard parts of her stories through open windows, saw the way people's eyes changed when I walked by. One neighbor stopped inviting Sophie to playdates. Another sent back the cupcakes we baked with a note. Please stop involving our children in your drama. It crushed Sophie. She thought it was her fault, that she'd ruined everything. I told her over and over it wasn't her, that it was Karen, but the damage had been done. Even our mail began to vanish. Packages stolen. Utilities mysteriously shut off. We were being slowly erased. Then, one night, my tires were slashed. The next morning, the ramp behind the house was torn off, completely ripped from the siding and tossed into the shrubs like garbage. I called the police again, filed a new report. I began sleeping with a bat beside my bed, my phone in hand, every sound in the night, making me jump. Sophie refused to sleep alone now. She asked me once, in the quiet darkness, "Do you think she'll come back again?" I lied. I said no, but I didn't believe it. It was at this point that the final twist came. A city official reached out, someone from the housing department. They had received one of my many complaints and finally escalated it for review. When they conducted a surprise audit of the HOA's internal policies and finances, what they found was stunning. Karen, it turned out, had been siphoning HOA funds into a personal account. She'd been finding not just us, but other quiet families too, always under the guise of compliance enforcement, but with no actual votes or approvals. Her brother-in-law, the HOA president, had been looking the other way in exchange for favors, landscaping deals, private vacation, expenses covered under maintenance budgets. It was corruption in plain sight, and now they were under investigation. Finally, I felt the tide turning, but justice doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it limps in slowly, exhausted, covered in the dust of months of chaos. Karen was formally removed from the HOA board. Her property was searched, charges were filed, trespassing, tampering with surveillance equipment, reckless endangerment of a minor. But even then, she managed to post bail and return to her house down the street. We still saw her, still felt her eyes on us from behind those curtains. But now, at least we weren't alone. The community had finally woken up. People began speaking out. One family moved away. Another publicly apologized for not helping us sooner. A small neighborhood Facebook group was created, this time without Karen in it. And when I walked Sophie to the park weeks later, someone we barely knew smiled and said, "I'm glad you're both still here." But scars remain. Sophie still sleeps with the giraffe Karen once tried to rip from her hands. I still check the basement door every night. But we're here. We're healing. And we survived Karen's wrath. Barely. But we did. The moment I hit upload on the security footage, my hands were shaking not from fear, but from the weight of everything we had endured. The grainy video, only 38 seconds long, showed Karen entering our home without permission, testing the basement door, and carefully relocking the custom latch she had installed. It was the proof I had prayed for, the undeniable truth I had fought to bring to light for months. I didn't add music, effects, or commentary, just cold reality with a simple caption. This is what HOA power abuse looks like. This woman locked my disabled daughter in a basement. Please share. Within hours, the post exploded. A few hundred views turned into thousands. By the next morning, it had crossed 1.2 million. Hashtags like hashtag Justice for Sophie, hashtag HOA Bully, and hashtag Expose Karen trended on every platform. Messages flooded in from strangers, mothers, disabled rights activists, legal experts, even former neighbors of Karen from other towns. It turned out she wasn't new to this kind of behavior. She was just used to getting away with it. One of those messages came from a woman named Melissa, a civil rights attorney who had seen the video through a disability advocacy group. She offered to represent us pro bono, citing the Americans with Disabilities Act, housing protection laws, and emotional abuse statutes. For the first time in this long, nightmarish battle, I felt like we had a real weapon, someone who knew how to fight this legally and wouldn't back down. Melissa moved fast. She filed formal charges against Karen for trespassing, unlawful confinement, child endangerment, and tampering with surveillance equipment. A restraining order was issued immediately. Karen was ordered to have no contact with us, directly or indirectly. And then we took it further. Melissa demanded a full forensic audit of the HOA and submitted a motion to the city to formally review every violation Karen had ever issued under her leadership. What emerged was staggering. Karen had a pattern, a history, of targeting families she didn't like, especially those with non-traditional needs. A single father with a son on the spectrum. A retired couple who had added a ramp for their granddaughter. Each one had either moved out under pressure or paid fines until they gave up. We were the first ones who stayed, the first ones who fought back. And now she was cornered. The next HOA meeting was held at the local community center to accommodate the crowd. Word had spread quickly, and the room was packed. Dozens of neighbors, journalists, activists, and HOA members who had once smiled through Karen's reign now sat in folding chairs, waiting to hear the truth. I stood near the front, heart pounding, with Melissa beside me. Karen walked in late, flanked by her brother-in-law and one other loyalist from the old board. She looked pale, but still smug, still believing she was untouchable. That illusion shattered quickly. Melissa laid out our case in clinical detail, showing the footage, reading quotes from Sophie's therapists, citing ADA statutes Karen had violated repeatedly. She passed out folders to every attendee, each filled with copies of fines, emails, testimony from other residents, and a timeline of Karen's actions. Karen tried to interrupt, but the new moderator, a young woman elected 2 months prior, shut her down immediately. "You'll have a chance to respond," she said coldly, after the presentation. It was the first time Karen had been told no in public. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for allies, but the silence was deafening. Then came Sophie's moment. She was scared but brave, her little hands shaking as she sat beside me, facing the crowd. "She locked me in the dark," she said quietly. "She told me I didn't belong. And I was so scared. I thought I was going to die." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even people who had once stayed silent now looked horrified, some openly crying. One neighbor, a woman who had previously returned our baked goods out of fear, stood up and said, "I believed her. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. We should have helped you." The room shifted. Momentum changed. The board voted unanimously to suspend Karen's membership, strip her of all authority, and begin the process of reformation, including external oversight and city involvement. It was the end of her reign, but not yet her punishment. Court proceedings followed soon after, and though Karen tried every tactic, denial, fake apologies, deflection, even victimhood, none of it held. The footage, the tampering, the testimony, it was irrefutable. Her own brother-in-law took a plea deal to avoid jail time, turning over emails and internal messages that showed Karen's manipulation, backdoor votes, and threats toward other board members. It was a collapse of her little empire. The court found her guilty on multiple counts. The judge, an older woman with a sharp voice and no patience for cruelty, delivered a stern message. "You took advantage of your position to terrorize a child. You weaponized power against the most vulnerable. That is not just illegal, it is morally reprehensible." Karen was sentenced to community service, psychological evaluation, and 6 months of house arrest with monitoring. Civil damages were awarded to us, enough to cover Sophie's therapy, home renovations, and legal costs. But it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the verdict. The public acknowledgement that Sophie had been hurt, that we weren't crazy, that the system had failed us. But eventually, it caught up with her. The story was picked up by national media. A segment aired on morning TV. Disability organizations used our case to launch awareness campaigns about HOA abuse and unregulated board power. A petition to mandate training for all HOA board members on ADA compliance and ethical conduct reached over 100,000 signatures. Sophie was invited to speak at a local advocacy event. She stood on stage holding her giraffe and said, "If someone tries to make you feel small, remember, they only do that because they're scared of how big your courage is." She received a standing ovation. And I stood in the back, watching her reclaim her voice, my heart both broken and healed at once. Karen, now a pariah in her own neighborhood, eventually sold her house and moved away. No one helped her pack. No one said goodbye. Her legacy had become one of cruelty and cowardice, whispered about in cautionary tales. The HOA was restructured and new elections were held. I was offered a seat on the board, but I declined. I didn't want power. I just wanted peace. And at last we had it. A new ramp was built, stronger, wider, and adorned with a hand-painted sign Sophie made herself. "Welcome, all abilities, all hearts." People stopped by just to see it. Children played outside again. And Sophie? She laughed again, really laughed. In the end, the showdown wasn't about a basement door or a stack of fines. It was about standing up when it would have been easier to back down. It was about facing down someone who thought they were bigger than the law, louder than justice, stronger than love. But she wasn't, because love fought back. And this time, love won. The weeks after the verdict felt strangely quiet, like stepping out of a storm only to realize the world still spins the same way, but you don't. The air was lighter, yes, but the silence now carried the weight of everything we had endured. Sophie began therapy twice a week, and little by little I saw the shadows retreat from her eyes. The first time she smiled again, really smiled, was when Lily came over with sidewalk chalk and asked her to draw a rainbow on our new accessibility ramp. It was a small thing, but it cracked open a door in Sophie's heart that fear had slammed shut. She still hesitated sometimes, flinched at the sound of a door creaking, or grew quiet when we passed Karen's old house, but healing doesn't happen all at once. It's a mosaic of moments. One afternoon, she looked up at me while we were baking and said, "Do you think she'll ever come back?" I knelt down and met her eyes. "No," I whispered. "And even if she does, we're not the same people anymore. We're stronger." And I believe that. We weren't just survivors, we were transformed. But scars don't vanish, they just soften. We didn't move, not out of stubbornness, but because we refused to let Karen steal one more thing from us. This was our home, and it belonged to Sophie just as much as anyone else in that neighborhood. Still, I made changes. New locks, new cameras, a new community within the community, built around the people who had come forward in the aftermath, families who had watched silently, neighbors who had once been afraid to speak, strangers who now reached out with open hands. Together, we created something the HOA never expected. A collective voice that held power without cruelty, that enforced rules without fear. The city implemented oversight for our HOA's future operations, requiring transparency, third-party reviews, and ADA training for all board members. What once operated in secrecy now lived under sunlight. Karen's story became a lesson in how unchecked authority can fester into cruelty, and her name, once wielded with entitlement and arrogance, became a cautionary tale. Don't be a Karen, people said, and they meant don't be her. But I knew this wasn't just about her. This was about every family who had been silenced, every child who had been treated as less than, every mother who had cried in the dark, wondering if they were the problem or just the next target. That's why I started something new, a nonprofit called the Sophie Project. Its mission was simple: to protect families with special needs children from housing discrimination, HOA abuse, and structural neglect. We partnered with attorneys, therapists, and volunteers to create toolkits for families, hotlines for support, and public campaigns to spread awareness. Sophie helped design the logo, a small giraffe wrapped in a heart. "Because giraffes see from up high," she said, "they notice things others miss." She was right. That became our motto: see what others miss. Speak when others stay silent. Our story reached places I never imagined. I was invited to speak at schools, community forums, disability conferences. I told them the truth, not just about what happened, but about what it felt like to be alone in the middle of it. How institutions protect power. How kindness must be louder than fear. I told them about the night Sophie cried behind a locked door. I told them about the woman who pushed her. And I told them about the little girl who got back up. We survived, Karen, I would say, but many don't. And that's why we're telling our story, because someone out there is going through this right now, and they need to know they're not alone. People cried when they heard it, donated, volunteered, and slowly the story became bigger than us. Karen, from what I heard, relocated to a smaller town hours away. No one knows much, only that she sold her house quietly and tried to disappear. But her digital footprint followed her. The video still circulates, a stark reminder of what unchecked pride and prejudice can become. I don't think about her much anymore, except when someone tells me they watched our story and finally spoke out. Then I remember her, not as the villain of our lives, but as the spark that lit a fire far larger than her reach. Sophie's scars are still there. She has nightmares sometimes. She still sleeps with the giraffe she held that day, but she also dances again. She laughs until her belly aches. She's teaching other kids in wheelchairs how to draw with sidewalk chalk. Last week, she stood in front of her class and read a speech about bravery. She wore her leg brace with glitter stickers on it and didn't flinch when someone asked what it was for. "It's so I can go everywhere," she said proudly. And my heart nearly burst. We still have hard days, but we have more good ones now, and that's enough. Our basement door has a new lock, strong, reinforced, and no longer something that makes us afraid. We open it often now, not to relive what happened, but to remind ourselves that we made it through. We didn't break. We didn't run. We didn't surrender to silence. We told the truth. We fought. We healed. And we are still standing. And now, if you've stayed with me through this entire story, thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. This wasn't easy to share, but I knew I had to, not just for my daughter, but for every parent who's felt powerless, for every child who's been made to feel like they don't belong, and for every neighbor who has watched injustice unfold and wondered whether speaking up would make a difference. Because it does. It always does. This wasn't just about a basement door or a broken ramp. It was about something much bigger, about how unchecked power, especially in places like HOAs, can destroy the very communities they claim to protect. It was about how silence, when weaponized by the wrong people, becomes cruelty. But more than anything, it was about love, a mother's love, the kind that refuses to be quiet, the kind that will break down locked doors, tear through walls of bureaucracy, and stand firm even when every system says to sit down. I'm just a mom. I didn't have money, power, or influence, but I had my daughter's voice, and I made the world hear it. And you? You can help amplify it. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, cry, or think, then don't let it end here. Please like this video, share it, and comment below with your own experiences or words of support. You never know who might be reading and realize they're not alone. Let's hold HOAs accountable. Let's demand oversight, transparency, and compassion. Let's protect the vulnerable instead of punishing them. Let's make it harder for people like Karen to hide behind technicalities and titles. If you want to help further, I urge you to support your local disability advocacy groups, volunteer, donate, or even just start conversations in your neighborhood. These changes start with stories, but they don't end there. They grow with action. And if you believe in real stories, real people, and real justice, subscribe to our channel, HOA Denied Access. We share true, powerful stories that deserve to be heard. We expose the wrong, we uplift the brave, and together, we make sure the silence doesn't win. Because we are louder, we are stronger, and we are not going anywhere. My daughter's story is not just a headline. It's a fight for dignity, for belonging, for justice. And if you're still here, you're now part of that fight. So don't look away. Not this time. Let's keep going. Let's keep pushing. And let's make sure no child is ever locked behind a door again and left alone in the dark. Not on our watch. Not ever again.